It's been hard, I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but it's given me a hunger to keep going.
There's a moment in every person's life where the world looks at them and decides who they are. It happens fast, sometimes in a single glance, sometimes in a whispered word passed between strangers. And once that decision gets made, it sticks. It follows a person like a shadow, showing up in classrooms, in waiting rooms, in the eyes of neighbors who think they already know your whole story. For Susan Boyle, that moment happened before she could even speak, before she could walk or laugh or understand the world around her. It happened on the day she was born, inside a cold and clinical hospital room in Scotland, when a doctor looked at a struggling newborn and said the words that would shape the next 5 decades of her life. Words that weren't even true. Susan Magdalene Boyle came into the world on April 1st, 1961, in Blackburn, West Lothian, Scotland. She was the youngest of 9 children born to Bridget and Patrick Boyle. The house she grew up in was small and full of noise, full of siblings, full of faith, and full of the kind of working-class warmth that doesn't cost money but means everything. Her father, Patrick, had spent years down in the coal mines and had served during World War II, but when he came home, he carried music with him. He sang at the local pub, the Bishop's Blaze, and his voice filled those modest rooms with something that transcended the hardship around it. Her mother, Bridget, was a shorthand typist with deep Irish roots tied to County Donegal, a woman whose Catholic faith was not a Sunday habit, but a daily anchor. These were the people Susan came from. These were the sounds and values that surrounded her from her very first breath. But that first breath almost didn't happen. When Bridget Boyle became pregnant at the age of 47, doctors were worried, and not quietly. They told her plainly that continuing the pregnancy could cost her life. The risks were serious, the complications were real. They advised her to end it, but Bridget refused. Her faith would not allow it, and her love was already too deep to turn back. She chose to carry the baby, knowing the danger, trusting in something larger than medical opinion. And when the time came, the birth was not easy. There were severe complications. Susan had to be delivered through emergency surgery, and during those terrifying minutes, something went wrong. For a brief but critical moment, the newborn was deprived of oxygen. She was tiny and struggled to breathe. She was placed in an incubator while her family held their breath outside the room, praying and waiting. The doctors looked at this fragile little girl and made a conclusion. They told the Boyle family that the baby had suffered brain damage. In 1961, that kind of diagnosis carried enormous weight. There were no detailed scans, no nuanced assessments, no second opinions available to a working-class family in a small Scottish town. The label landed and it stayed. And so, Susan Boyle began her life already carrying a verdict that the world had handed down before she ever had a chance to prove otherwise. Growing up with that label was not a small thing. It carved its way into every corner of her childhood. At school, she struggled in ways that teachers and classmates didn't understand, and in the 1960s and 70s, lack of understanding almost always translated into cruelty. Kids are not naturally kind when something seems different, and Susan was different. She had difficulty processing social cues. She had moments of emotional overwhelm. She had learning struggles that her teachers attributed to the brain damage diagnosis rather than looking deeper for a real answer. And so the teasing began. They called her Susie Simple. They laughed at her. They pushed her aside in hallways and playgrounds, making sure she understood she didn't quite belong. What should have been a place of growth and discovery became a daily exercise in survival. The bullying wasn't just noise, it settled into her bones. It became the voice in the back of her mind that said she was less than. And the adults in the room, the teachers who should have known better, often did nothing. Some of them contributed to the atmosphere, reinforcing the idea that Susan was a child with limited potential and limited worth. The anxiety that grew out of those years followed her into adulthood like a quiet but constant companion. But there was one place where none of that existed. One place where Susan Boyle was not Susie Simple, not a diagnosis, not a disappointment. That place was music. Around the age of 12, she started singing in her school and in her parish church choir, and something about the act of singing was different from everything else. It required nothing from her except her voice and her feeling, and both of those were extraordinary. Church became the space where she exhaled. The choir became a kind of family that didn't care about labels. And the music, hymns, ballads, anything with melody and meaning, became the language she used to say what she couldn't say any other way. Her father's love of singing had passed down to her like a genetic gift. She had inherited something from those nights at the Bishop's Blaze pub, a comfort with performance, a natural instinct for melody, a deep emotional connection to a well-crafted song. And as she grew older, that gift only deepened. In her mid-20s and into her 30s, Susan began taking the dream more seriously. In the mid-1990s, she found vocal coach Fred O'Neill in Livingston, and together they worked for nearly 6 years. Real work, scales, breath control, technique, stamina. He recognized what she had immediately. He called it a mezzo-soprano voice, and he believed it could take her somewhere significant if she was willing to put in the hours. She was more than willing. She was hungry. Those years of training gave her something important beyond technique. They gave her structure. They gave her the discipline to believe that the voice she had was worth developing, worth protecting, worth fighting for. And she did fight for it, even when the world wasn't paying attention. In 1995, at 34 years old, she auditioned for Michael Barrymore's television show. She was rejected. It stung, but she kept going. In 1998, she used her own savings to record a demo at a studio in Scotland, 3 songs including Cry Me a River, Killing Me Softly, and Don't Cry for Me, Argentina. She mailed copies to record labels and television programs across the country. Every single one of them ignored her. Not a single response came back. The silence was heavy and particular, the kind of silence that feels like a door shutting. In 1999, she paid to have one of her tracks included in a small charity CD that only a few hundred people would ever hear. By 2000, she was 39 years old, living quietly in Blackburn, singing for her church and for small local audiences, wondering if the dream was ever going to become anything more than a dream. During all of this, she was also caring for her mother. Bridget had grown elderly and unwell, and Susan stayed close, devoted to the woman who had risked her own life to bring her into the world. When Bridget died in February 2007, the grief that followed was enormous. Susan stepped back from everything. The singing stopped, the dreaming stopped. For a while, it felt like the chapter was simply over. But some quiet and stubborn part of her couldn't let it go. She decided to try one more time. Not because she was confident, not because the world had given her any reason to believe it would go differently this time. She decided to try because of her mother and the memory of her mother's belief in her and a promise she made to herself in the quieter moments of grief that she would do something meaningful with the voice she had been given. In 2008, Britain's Talent God held auditions in Glasgow and Susan Boyle applied. Her number was 432122. She was 47 years old. On April 11, 2009, she walked out onto the stage at the Clyde Auditorium in front of thousands of live audience members and millions more watching at home on television at home. She wore a simple beige dress. Her hair was set in the style she'd always worn. She walked with the slightly awkward confidence of someone who has rehearsed their courage but isn't entirely sure it's going to hold. And when the host asked what her dream was, she said she wanted to be as successful as Elaine Page. The audience laughed, not with her, at her. The judges raised their eyebrows. Simon Cowell folded his arms. Piers Morgan gave a look that said he already knew how this was going to go. Amanda Holden raised her brows in the patient, resigned way of someone preparing to be politely unimpressed. The room had already decided what this woman was. She was the joke. She was the cautionary tale. She was the deluded middle-aged lady from a small town who didn't know her own limitations. And then she opened her mouth. What happened next has been described thousands of times in thousands of articles, but no description quite captures the feeling of it. The music began. She sang the opening bars of I Dreamed Dream from Les Miserables, and within the first few seconds, the laughter in that auditorium didn't just fade, it evaporated. It was replaced by something stunned and electric. By the time she reached the first chorus, the crowd was already on its feet. By the end of the performance, people were wiping tears. Piers Morgan called it the biggest yes he had ever given on the show. Amanda Holden admitted openly that she had been cynical and was ashamed of it. Simon Cowell's expression had gone from guarded dismissal to something that looked almost like awe. That one performance aired to 11 million viewers in the United Kingdom. The clip went online, and within days it had gathered tens of millions of views. By the end of 2009, it had been watched by more than 500 million people worldwide, making it one of the most viewed video clips of any kind that year. In less than 48 hours, a church volunteer who had never held a record deal became one of the most recognized voices on the planet. She finished second on the show. Dance group Diversity took the win, but by then, the outcome of the competition barely mattered. Susan Boyle had already won something far larger. Her debut album, I Dreamed a Dream, was released on November 23, 2009, and in its first week, it sold 411,000 copies in the United Kingdom and 71,000 in the United States. That US number was the highest opening week sales of any debut album by a solo female artist in the country that year, more than any other new artist in any genre, at any age. And Susan was 48 years old. She would turn 49 shortly after. Guinness World Records confirmed what the numbers were already shouting. She had become the oldest artist ever to reach